Greetings, everyone. Here are the main points of today's video. Poland is ready to go to war with Putin if the Kremlin crosses the line. Warsaw has just sent a cold, direct message straight to Putin as it quietly builds the largest continental army in all of Europe. What kind of devastating weapons does this country, which has been torn apart many times in history, possess to force the Russian superpower to be cautious? Western intelligence uncovered a red flag operation designed to justify attacking a NATO country. Behind the scenes of secret thefts, factory arson, and the dangerous mind games in the palace, a shadow war is escalating to a record level. What terrifying truth, with a 2-year timeline and a provocation plot, could ignite a global destructive conflict? Why is Poland willing to make itself the most dangerous target in the world to protect Ukraine's lifeline? The American superpower unexpectedly pulls back. The manpower crisis on the training ground and Washington's sudden reversal in 2026 are pushing Poland into a risky gamble, especially when the strongest weapons are in someone else's hands. Welcome to the analysis program of Luan Banchinsu. Before we get into the details, please take a few seconds to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue. Thank you, dear audience. Poland is ready to declare war on Putin. The 2-year countdown for Putin has begun. Ladies and gentlemen, for Poland, the painful memories of a nation that was torn apart by 3 great empires in 1795, erased from the world map for more than a century, and endured decades under the grip of the Soviet Union after World War II, have forged a harsh survival instinct for this land. Now, in the face of escalating military actions from the Kremlin, with drones and fighter jets continuously violating the airspace of Estonia, Poland, and Romania, along with increasingly unpredictable developments on the Ukrainian front, Warsaw understands that they cannot back down. In the context of the West showing signs of fatigue from the prolonged war, Poland has decided to stand up, dispelling the shadows of doubt to shape a new balance of power in Central and Eastern Europe on its own. This pivotal shift was affirmed by a strong statement from Polish Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Zadol Stoczkowski in a bombshell interview with the American television network CBS News. No longer the isolated and exhausted Poland of 1939, Warsaw sent a direct message to President Vladimir Putin. If Ukraine is not enough for you, you will have to face us. This warning officially marks the end of the era of a hesitant and divided Europe in 2022. Behind this warning is a formidable military capability that has been quietly but rapidly built up, turning Poland into one of the most heavily armed strongholds on the continent, possessing the most advanced equipment from F-16 and F-35 fighter jets, Abrams tanks to the HIMARS rocket artillery system. Even more concerning, this veteran hardline diplomat has made a dramatic prediction about a grim scenario in the next 2 years. The Kremlin could stage a false flag operation, creating a fabricated pretext through a self-orchestrated provocation to justify attacking a NATO member country. However, these public threats are just the tip of the iceberg, reflecting a shadowy war full of dangers unfolding along the border. The outbreak of the current diplomatic crisis began with a serious act of sabotage targeting the strategic railway line connecting the 2 cities of Warsaw and Lapland. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk publicly stated before Parliament that 2 agents working for Russian intelligence were the perpetrators of this act before fleeing to Belarus. In response to that covert attack, Poland firmly decided to close the Russian Consulate General in Gdansk, a diplomatic facility that had existed since the 1950s. However, Moscow refused to hand over the building, citing post-World War II agreements and leaving only 1 staff member inside to maintain inviolability. The confrontation immediately escalated into a practical sanction as Poland tightened its grip, cutting off all electricity and heating to the building, and filing a lawsuit when property records clearly showed that the real estate belonged to the Polish state, along with unpaid rent and accumulated interest amounting to millions of dollars. When the Polish Supreme Prosecutor's Office petitioned the court to confiscate the Consulate General building on Gdansk, the diplomatic front quickly became a high-stakes public battle of wits. The Russian side retaliated with an equally provocative move when former president and current deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, insulted the Polish people by calling them shameless occupiers. The consular crisis is actually just the tip of the iceberg of a shadow war that has been quietly escalating between the two countries for a long time. Poland has not acted impulsively. They have consistently made similar strategic moves for years, including in 2022. They boldly seized the Russian diplomatic complex, which had been nicknamed the Spy-Gogo spy town. By 2023, they continued to take over the school that originally belonged to the children of Russian diplomats. In retaliation, the Russian side removed the memorial plaques at the Katan historical site, which preserved the painful memories between the two nations. The gamble with the threat to reclaim the palace by Dmitry Medvedev was perhaps the loudest move, but it was probably the least harmful move on this multi-layered, intense chessboard. The key point here is that Poland is determined not to back down. They are actively taking the initiative in this situation. This country is carrying out the fastest military restructuring in modern European history, dedicating 4 to 5% of its gross national income to the defense budget, a rate that not only leads the bloc, but also surpasses even the superpower, the United States. With its active military personnel approaching 250,000 and an ambitious goal of reaching 500,000 troops, that includes 300,000 professional soldiers and 200,000 reservists, Poland's forces will completely surpass traditional powers like Germany, France, or the UK, proudly becoming the largest continental army in all of Europe. This is the ironclad vow of a nation that has been trampled by foreign powers many times, determined never to let itself fall into helplessness again. When Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski declared that we have an army ready to fight, it was a confidence backed by a massive and extremely impressive arsenal of military equipment. Poland's armed forces are being completely reshaped based on hard-earned lessons drawn directly from the battlefield in Ukraine. Witnessing the devastating power that a limited number of HIMARS launchers inflicted on the Russian army's rear, Poland immediately ordered an enormous number, nearly 500 of these advanced multiple rocket launcher systems, from the United States. On the ground, their armored firepower is heading straight toward the milestone of surpassing 1,000 modern tanks, with an order of more than 250 American M1 Abrams tanks combined with hundreds of K2 Black Panther tanks. They bought tanks from South Korea, adding to their Leopard 2 fleet. In the skies, starting from 2026, the first fifth-generation Stealth F-35 fighters from the contract for 32 units have begun to be delivered, ready to operate alongside the modernized F-16 fleet and South Korea's F-A-50 fighters. The arrival of Patriot missile defense systems, more than 90 Apache attack helicopters, along with superior heavy artillery capabilities, has completed the picture of comprehensive armament. Completely abandoning what? Replacing Soviet-era weapons with purely American and South Korean technology carries a profound meaning. It is a complete break from Moscow's sphere of influence. The shield is the most obvious material example of this strategy of waiting for reinforcements. Eastern Shield, the National Defense Project, was activated in 2024. With a $2.5 billion budget and a 2028 deadline, this project covers 700 kilometers along the border, including 400 kilometers by Belarus and 200 near the Kaliningrad exclave. Kilometers of border front lines, including about 400 kilometers adjacent to Belarus and 200 kilometers close to Russia's Kaliningrad exclave. This is a fortified defense complex that includes trenches, fortifications, anti-tank ditches, drone surveillance towers, reconnaissance balloons, physical barriers, minefields, and a high-tech integrated monitoring system. Notably, the decision to restart the production line for anti-personnel mines after decades of suspension is the clearest evidence of how seriously Poland is preparing for the worst-case scenario. The Eastern Shield strategy centers on neutralizing two major pincers. First is Kaliningrad, Russia's isolated territory wedged between NATO countries, which constantly threatens to suffocate the entire region with advanced S-400 air defense systems and long-range missile capabilities. The second direction is Belarus, the Kremlin's closest ally, which is considered a launch pad and a staging area for a potential attack. The threat from this direction is no longer hypothetical, as Minsk has deliberately pushed waves of refugees across the Polish border as a form of hybrid warfare, accompanied by acts of sabotage and scattered mines in the area. Lying right between these two deadly pincers is the Suwalki Corridor, a narrow strip of land considered NATO's Achilles heel. If Russia takes this key route, the three Baltic countries will be cut off from the rest of the alliance. The Eastern Shield project has surrounded this vital corridor, not only with concrete, fortifications, and mines, but also with a dense military presence. During large-scale joint exercises between Russia and Belarus, such as Zapad, Poland is ready to deploy up to 40,000 troops to the border, working together with allied engineering units, with Germany directly participating in building the defensive line. Faced with such a solid fortress and iron will, does Russia really dare to risk a direct confrontation with Poland? Strategic calculations at this time provide a relatively clear answer. At least in the near future, this is an impossible gamble for the Kremlin. With the flames of war in Ukraine still raging fiercely and consuming resources, opening a second front against a NATO member country like Poland would be military suicide. Confronting Poland and the massive alliance backing them, Russia would completely lose control of the skies as well as its qualitative edge in combat. A harsh reality that even the toughest strategists in Moscow have to be wary of. But throughout 2025 and up to the middle of 2026, Europe has continuously recorded a series of mysterious sabotage and provocative incidents that bear the clear mark of Russian intelligence. The number of covert sabotage incidents has quadrupled in just 1 year, forcing NATO to raise the threat alert to a record level. The evidence is astonishingly clear. Energy pipelines and internet cables beneath the Baltic Sea have been mysteriously cut repeatedly. A weapons factory in the Czech Republic and a bustling shopping center right in the capital city of Warsaw were set on fire. Estonia's airspace was seriously violated by Russian fighter jets, while the skies over Poland echoed with the sounds of dozens of drones. The common point of all these incidents is that they can easily be denied and are always kept just below the red line of an all-out war. Foreign Minister Jadastor Sikorski's warning about a false flag campaign is a logical extension of this gray zone warfare mindset, and that's where the most concerning risks lie. Western intelligence agencies have continuously issued warnings that as soon as a fragile ceasefire is established in Ukraine, Russia could quickly regroup and strengthen its forces. According to some strategic calculations, the Kremlin would need only 2 years after the guns fall silent to be ready for a local war in the Baltic region, and just 6 months to launch a limited military campaign against a single neighboring country. In other words, the large Russian forces currently tied down in Ukraine today could be completely freed up tomorrow. That's why Poland's intense military preparations are not paranoia, but rather a fierce race against time. The greatest danger now is no longer massive columns of Russian tanks crossing the border. It's a hybrid provocation spiraling out of control, a miscalculation in strategic planning, or when a side misreads a warning or diplomatic message, making it a true red line on the battlefield. It's an equation with a low probability of occurring, but the consequences would be catastrophic and destructive, and that's why Poland is being forced to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Red alert: the reason for Russia to attack a NATO country. Poland is one of Kiev's most generous and steadfast allies, with more than 46 massive military aid packages sent. From tanks, armored vehicles, heavy artillery systems to fighter jets, and millions of rounds of ammunition, with a total value of up to billions of euros, have been poured into the battlefield. Not stopping there, Poland has also become a training hub for Ukrainian soldiers. At the same time, Warsaw continuously uses its political weight within NATO to put pressure on and urge Western allies to increase their support. However, the most crucial role that Poland plays for Ukraine does not lie in the batches of donated weapons, but in its unique geographical location. Poland is the sole gateway receiving the flow of aid from the Western world into Ukraine, with about 80 to 90% of this equipment having to pass through Rzeszów Airport. This location has become the only vital lifeline sustaining the war machine of Kyiv. Without Poland, it would be nearly impossible for Western weapons and ammunition to reach the front lines. This is also the sharp thorn that keeps the Kremlin on edge. A strong Polish army and robust border fortifications force Russia to spread its resources defensively due to a pincer effect. Even as Russia focuses its forces on Ukraine, it must still closely monitor this strong NATO country to the northwest. A geopolitical overview has made it clear that Poland's security and Ukraine's survival are now two inseparable pieces of a single equation. As long as Poland stands firm, Ukraine's lifeline remains intact. As long as Ukraine resists, Russia cannot turn to strike Poland. This is why all of Warsaw's preparations are a breathless race to build up their capabilities before the threat fully materializes. However, the most critical vulnerability lies in an external factor. Poland's security ultimately depends deeply on the will of Washington. Warsaw's deterrence strategy relies completely on NATO's Article 5 and its bilateral relationship with the United States. Ironically, this strongest pillar is now becoming more unstable than ever. In mid-2026, the United States unexpectedly reversed its commitment by canceling the plan to deploy 4,000 troops to Poland, while also signaling a reduction in its overall military presence on the continent. The skeptical stance toward NATO of President Donald Trump's administration and major questions about America's future are seriously shaking the lifeline that Poland trusts the most. In addition, there is a structural weakness, as most of Poland's arsenal originates from the United States. And in key areas such as long-range intelligence or air defense, the whole of Europe still has to rely heavily on Washington. Even in terms of ammunition production capacity, the combined strength of NATO is still lagging behind Russia, while the delivery time for defense systems like the Patriot can take several years. Therefore, if the worst-case scenario happens and Poland is left alone, their strongest strategic assets are actually in someone else's hands. The real question now is not whether Poland can defeat Russia on its own, but whether the solid wall that Warsaw is putting all its efforts into building is strong enough to deter Russia, and whether Putin dares to attack Poland.